In this app, eventually I'm going to want to have a separate page for each of the lists that I have here. Right now I'm sort of faking that by having this specific list page. But this is going to be kind of annoying if I have to create a whole new HTML page for each list. Instead, we're going to make a template, and then each list is going to be dynamically inserted into that template. So instead of having to have one separate HTML page for every single list, we're just going to have one HTML page, a template, and data is going to be inserted into it by Rails, so we can reuse the same HTML for every single list. In order to do this, the first thing I'm going to do, well, first off, we have to determine how we want these lists to be accessed. Since all of the lists are in this array right here, each one has sort of its own ID. That is, each one has its own index, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. What I think would be nice is if I go to, say, slash lists slash 2, it takes me to the thing with the index of 2 in that array. So if I go to list slash 2, it would take me to list 3 right here. Yeah, I know that's kind of confusing, but that's arrays for you. If I go to list 1, then it would take me to this one. If I go to list 3, it would take me to this one, and so on and so forth. So that's what I'm going to build in right now. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my roots file, also known as the router, and I'm going to change this specific list one to slash list slash colon list number. Now, this having a colon right here, this does something very special in Ruby. What this means is, well, it's sort of a way of inserting a variable into a URL. That is, it says when someone goes to slash list slash some sort of number over here, it's going to take them to the list show controller. So this should already work. If I go to list 3, it takes me there. If I go to lists 10, it takes me there. If I go to lists 0, it takes me there. I no longer have a route defined for a specific list. So if I go to try to go to a specific list, I'm going to get an error. Now the only way I can access the show page is by going to slash list slash some sort of number. This doesn't have to be called list number. This could be wombat. This could be anything. The importance of it is if I go back to the list controller, I'm going to put some JSON in here. I'm going to say render JSON request params. I did that exact same thing in the create method earlier. Now if I go back here, you can see that I have a list number of 0. If I change it to 22, I have a list number of 22. If I change this to wombat, I should now have a wombat of 22. So this is something built right into Rails where it sees that you have this sort of variable thing in your URL, and it considers to be a variable anything beginning with a colon. And then it makes whatever was inserted into that variable, 22 in this case, it makes that available, in this request.params object inside the controller. I don't actually want this to be called wombat. I'm going to stick with list number because that makes more sense. All right, so now what I want to happen is if someone goes on here, each of these list titles should be a link to the page for that specific list. So in order to make this happen, I'm going to go to the index view, and I'm going to change this from being just a plain old each to an each with index. This is a built-in enumerable, which gives you access to each thing's index in an array. All right, so now I'm not just going to, well, first off, if I refresh the page, I can see that nothing has changed. Now I want to actually do something with that index. So first off, let me make sure I can access the index. All right, you can see them right there, 0, 1, 2, 3. Now what I want to do is turn these into a link. So what I could do is something like ahref slash list, and then I could actually put these Cthulhu hats, clan equals hats, whatever you want to call them. I could put it right in here and then have the list right there. Let's see if that works. So it works, but it looks kind of ugly. There's an easier way of doing this in Rails, and that is to use another helper. The helper we saw before was form tag. Now we're going to use the link to helper. So the way this works is this makes a link There you go. So it makes a link with this text in it. The first thing in here, in this case it's text. If I change this to banana, each link will have the text of banana. Uh, but right now I'm not specifying where it should actually link to. So I'll do that next. I'm going to comment this guy out so I stop seeing it. There we go. Okay, so I want the text in each list to be the list title. There we go. I can see those now. And now to say where I want the link to go, now I just type the URL I want. So I can do /list. And because I'm in ERB, I can just do this nice little hash bracket syntax. And there we go. Now, if I hover over this, you can see each one of these has its index. You can see it down here in the bottom left of Chrome. So if I click on list 1, it takes me there. If I go to list 2, there that is, and so on and so forth. So now I have a handy little way of making a link to each of the specific pages for these lists. This, I think, this line right here looks much tidier than this line right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this line. But before I do that, so one thing I want to talk about is commenting out these ERB tags, these clown hats. If I refresh this page, what I have right here, obviously it's not showing up on this page, but if you look in the source code, you can see that my code, this ERB, it actually still is here. It's right here inside these comments. So if you comment out clown hats with regular old HTML comments, the clown hats are still processed. Rails is still going to do all the stuff that takes place inside those clown hats. The only way to comment out a clown hat is to change this equal sign to a pound sign. If I do that in both of these, now that those little pieces of Ruby are no longer processed, and you can see that they just disappeared right here. So just keep in mind that commenting out clown hats with HTML comment syntax, that doesn't actually prevent the Ruby from being processed. In order to do that, you either just need to delete it altogether or do this comment syntax right here where it's clown hats with a pound sign. But I'm not going to keep that. I'm just going to leave it like this. And now I have this handy list of lists. So I'm going to save that commit as going to a lists page based on its ID. I'm going to call it an ID here. Really, it's just its index in an array.